Scary is how a lot of people are describing revelations that one of the nation's best-known companies has been involved in what some would say is corporate spying, providing Washington, the government, with the telephone records of millions of U.S. customers. With more on the close relationship Verizon has forged with the government, Eamon Javers is live in Washington. Eamon?
Good evening, Tyler. Well, we began the day today with a huge scoop from the London Guardian newspaper, which reported that Verizon had received a court order from a secret intelligence court called a FISA court, ordering Verizon to turn over communications records from Americans' phone calls both here in the United States and overseas. What they were after was the so-called metadata, information about that calling. After that scoop hit the news in Washington, we saw a huge effort by Republicans and Democrats here in town to rally around the intelligence community and really defend this, including from the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Importantly here, the chairman of the committee is a Republican defending the Obama administration here. He said this kind of data gathering has helped to save lives. Take a listen.
And the reason they use this, and I can tell you why this program is important, that within the last few years, this program was used to stop a stop a terrorist attack in the United States. We know that. It's important.
In addition, let me walk you through a couple of bullet points here that a senior administration official gave us this morning, explaining why they thought that this is not as serious a story as at least some of the first impressions were this morning. They said that this order doesn't allow the government to listen in on the calls. It just allows them to get information about the calls. It doesn't include the content of those communications or the names of the people who are engaged in them. And it also says that it relates exclusively to this metadata. That's the phone numbers that the calls originated from, how long the calls lasted, who called whom, that sort of information. And guys, I can tell you that a sort of establishment Washington now has come out very much in favor of this program. There have been some critical voices in town today, and Verizon sent a note to its own employees explaining that they couldn't confirm or deny whether this had happened, but if it did, that under the law they would have had to follow this court order, guys.
Eamon, tell us a little bit more about some of those critical voices, because certainly this was a topic everywhere in the country, not just in Washington, you know, at water coolers in every single office. I mean, what are the critics saying?
Yeah, what was interesting was how this has kind of reversed things in Washington. You saw Dick Durbin come out, who's one of the president's biggest allies traditionally. He said he thought that this was disturbing today, but then you had Republican voices like Rogers and others who came out and said, you know what, we think this is perfectly fine, it's being handled appropriately, and Congress had the right oversight. So it sort of flipped Democrats and Republicans, kind of an interesting, strange bedfellows here in Washington today.
I want to turn you back to a thing you just said, and it was that no names were attached to these data. But then you said that the government was interested in who was calling whom. What is it then?
Well, what they're doing is they're tracking the phone numbers themselves. And so then if they get a particular phone number that's of interest, they can go back and reverse engineer those under a specific process for going into this database. They can go and look at who was calling that person and then the numbers that person called. Then they can go back and reverse engineer those names if they need them. But officials were at pains today to say that it's only rarely that they go into the database, and it has to involve a special, transparent process for doing that. It's not something that they're doing and trolling through this database on a regular basis.
Got it. So they use those numbers to sort of describe a web, presumably, of communications. Eamon Javers.
Exactly.
Eamon, thank you very much.